Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome students to another lecture of political leadership and communication. In the previous classes or lectures, we discussed about what is communication, the evolution of communication. Now today we are going to study about the leadership, okay? What is a leadership skills we have? Who is a leader actually? When we talk about, who is the leader, the first thing which comes into our mind, somebody who is basically, have an accountability, somebody who leads the team, or probably somebody who, gives directions, has an authority or a power. Now, apart from the leadership, skills which we generally think in a leader should have, is also important that we, differentiate who is a leader from basically other systems of authority. For example, a manager, okay? Now there's a difference between a leader and a manager. Generally we think that a manager is also some kind of a leader, but no, when we talk about leadership theories, a leader is very different from a manager, okay? How he or she is different is basically when we see a particular leader. Now leader is basically a person who has a vision, who particularly tries to lead the team. There's a motivational skill which lies within the leader. There's an influencing power which lies within the leader. Also that he or she is basically trying to take even the risk or change the system according to the circumstances. Whereas when we see a manager particularly, so the duty of manager is just to manage things or perform managerial jobs, which is basically coordination or how the working of an organization could run smoothly. There are less chances where you see actually a manager taking risk, because that is his not duty. His duty is basically to see whether the day-to-day running of an organization is done smoothly, and if at all there is a certain kind of problem which exists, there is a procedure which the manager generally follows, and it's a fixed procedure. It is according to the rules and regulations. There are rare chances where you actually see a manager particularly trying to brought about a change in the company or whatever on an organization. But when we talk about a leader, now leader could be a leader of a company, a CEO of a company, it could be a political leader, it could be a PM of your country, a president of your country, or anybody, particularly a person who has brought about a change, who sees a vision for their own particular organization or country in that case. And also a leader is somebody who connects with a lot of people, okay? Now when we are studying this particular course, which is political leadership and communication, why are we studying it together? Why don't we just have political leadership as a course? That is the reason, because when we talk about political leadership, communication is very important. And since we've already discussed that communication would mean establishing certain kind of commonness with the people. So leadership is also a kind of a skill, or a leader is somebody who tries to develop this commonness, who tries to connect with the people, empathize with the people. So that is why when we talk about who is a leader, we generally have names like Mahatma Gandhi, we have names like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, we have Indira Gandhi, we have Narendra Modi currently, or probably if you see at a global level, we also have Martin Luther King Jr., we have Nelson Mandela as a leader. Now, all these people, how are they different from each other, is particularly we can study through, analyzing the different qualities we have in a leader, or, what is the uniqueness we saw. Why do these leaders, became famous? They were not very similar to each other. They were very different, but there was some unique quality which basically differentiated them from each other. Now, when we talk about Mahatma Gandhi, the first thing which comes in your mind is that, yes, he was a proponent of non-violence, okay, or satyagrah. Okay, so these kind of uniqueness which Mahatma Gandhi had, that is why after your 1918s during the national freedom struggle, we find that there's a kind of a dramatic shift which happens in your freedom struggle. How from particularly the moderates or the extremist phase or the revolutionaries phase, we have particularly Mahatma Gandhi coming into power, and we saw a kind of a shift which was happening in our Indian freedom struggle. And that is why that's one of the major reasons that he's also regarded as the father of the nation. Why? Because of his ability to connect with the mass population, which was lacking before that. Okay. Similarly, when we talk about Nelson Mandela, now in Africa, we know that just as the Britishers were ruling us, in Africa also the Britishers, it was a colony of the Britishers, and that is why we saw Nelson Mandela also coming up with fighting for discrimination. And again, there was one thing which was common between Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, was that ability to connect with the people, ability to stand for people's demands, and also find something common between them. Okay. And similarly goes with Martin Luther King Jr. He was also a political activist in America, fighting for the political and civil rights of African Americans. Until 1960s, we see that particularly these African Americans were not given political or civil rights. Okay, so that is why when we talk about these leaders or see their leadership styles, we basically try to analyze what is that, uniqueness, or what is that skill particularly which they had, which made them a leader. So today's lecture would be analyzing about the theories of leadership, the styles of leadership, and how do we compare each style, or where do we place these people in particularly these kind of leadership styles. Okay, so we'll start the class by talking about who actually is a leader, what is the definition of leader, or do we have a definition of leader, or it is something which or there are traits which basically evolve over the period of time. So let's see this. Who is a leader? A leader is seen as a specific person in a group who influences and directs the other members of the group towards achievement of tasks or goals of the group. Now, you may think that when I say that he or she is a specific person who influences and directs. Now, sometimes we see that influencing can also is used as a synonym of manipulation. Okay, but they are two different things. When we talk about influence, we are trying to achieve on a positive goal. When we saying manipulation, we sometimes tend to take it in a negative connotation, which basically believes that you're trying to manipulate somebody to do something which he or she would not otherwise have done. Okay, so here there's a difference which you need to make, is that the leader is somebody who tries to influence and directs. Now, when I say directs, which basically means that you're putting that person in a place of authority. Okay, so when I say directs, that doesn't mean that if the person is directing some kind of work, which basically means that he or she is at a lower, the subordinates are not at a higher or a lower platform. It basically believes that the direction would also lead to future leaders, creating of future leaders here. Okay, so a leader is seen as a specific person in a group who influences and directs the other members of the groups towards achievement of the task or goals. Okay, leadership is a relationship between the leader and the group members, in which the leader directs, controls and supervises the members to achieve the goals of the group, and this achievement is satisfying to both the leader and the group. So there's a mutual gain here happening. Okay, the type of leadership could be distinct leadership requires a very high degree of precision, confidence level, sensitivity, care and technical expertise that may be different than in simple management oriented portfolio. So as I told you, there's a difference between a manager and a leader. Leader should have a varied amount of skills as compared to a manager. Okay, there should be empathy, there should be care, there should be expertise in what you are basically leading. You should be different from others, only then people will probably listen to you. And similarly, when we talk about manager, now that also is a person with authority, but the only difference here is that the duties or the accountability of manager is limited as compared to the leader. Okay, it means that situation, context, culture, working environment, new laws and regulations, information overload, organizational complexities and psycho-social developments remarkably impact the leadership concept. So these are the varied forms which basically impact your leadership qualities, or how a leadership should behave, or leader should behave in certain circumstances, whether it is socio developments. Similarly, when Mahatma Gandhi was in India, he was basically fighting for our freedom, the freedom struggle. Okay, so there was a circumstance which was already there. There was an environment which was already there when he entered the national freedom struggle, and that was basically to fight against the Britishers. Okay, but if you see particularly Martin Luther Jr., you basically feel that there was already a democracy which was established in America. It was not a colonial rule, but still you feel that these political and civil rights were not given. So then that environment is very different from what it existed in India. Okay. Now, let's move on to discussing about the theories of leadership. Okay. Now, we will be studying about certain theories, and you could place these leaders within these theories, as well as we will try to analyze different leaders, whether it is these are political leaders or these are particularly leaders of major organizations. For example, we could also analyze Ratan Tata. We could analyze the owner of Microsoft. Okay. So theories of leadership is basically have been developed over the period of time. These are basically the style theories, the great man theory, the trait theory, and the situation or contingent theory. Okay, so let's start with the first theory, which is the great man theory. Now, this theory was given by Thomas Carl, and he stated that a great man theory is that in which the leaders are born, and that only those men who are endowed with heroic potentials could ever become leaders. Now, here we see that particularly in this theory, it is believed that leaders are born. So when we say these statements, a leader is basically born. He or she was destined to do this. Okay, so then this theory basically says that leader is not something who acquires skill over the period of time, but is some person who is born to be a leader. Okay, for example, Indira Gandhi was said to be a born leader. Okay, though there could be a difference in perception with other theories, but this particular theory believes that a leader is born with skills automatically. He or she need not actually acquire them according to your experience. Okay, another very famous scholar, American philosopher, is Sidney Hook, who further expanded Carl's perspective, highlighting the impact which could be made by eventful man versus event making man. Now, there's a difference when we talk about great man theory, is that whether he or she is a born leader, then also there are two particularly circumstances. One is an eventful man, which basically means that there exists a historical situation, but that does not really determine its course. Okay. On the other hand, he maintained that the actions of the event making man influence the course of events, which could have been different had he not been involved in the process. Okay. Now, for example, there is an event, there is a fire outbreak in a train. Okay. For example, in Sabarmati Express, we all know that there were riots, and that is why the train was burned. Now, in such a situation, there is an event which has already been created. Okay. Now, a leader would probably try to manage the situation by deploying forces, by deploying the police, by analyzing how many people were hurt. Okay. Or for that matter, trying to lead that situation in a positive manner, or trying to bring about solutions. Now, here what happened is that event was already been created, and the leader, since he was a part in that event, he basically formed a solution. On the other hand, who is an eventful man? Eventful man is particularly somebody, whenever there is a situation, the environment is there, but then he or she tries to create such an event that it would lead to a solution. For example, when Mahatma Gandhi came in the Indian national struggle, he is regarded as an eventful man. Why eventful? Because he created events like non-cooperation movement, he created events like Khilafat movement, he created events like Quit India movement. Okay, so that is why Mahatma Gandhi is regarded as an eventful man who basically changed the course of history through his leadership qualities by creating certain kind of events. Okay, so I'm hoping that this is clear what is the difference between eventful and event making man. Okay, the event making man's role is based on the consequences of the outstanding capacities of intelligence, will and character rather than the actions of distinction. Okay, now basically what I told you, that when Mahatma Gandhi came to in the Indian freedom struggle, the first thing he did was your Kheda movement, your Champaran, your Ahmedabad mill strike, and for the first time people saw that how particularly a non-violent revolution can also bring about a change. The revolution need not always be violent. Okay, so it was him that who made this event in with his capacities and intelligence through his non-violence a kind of a solution to basically fighting against the Britishers. Okay, this concept of leadership was morally flawed, as there was a case with Hitler, Napoleon, and like thereby challenging the credibility of great man theory. Now here's a critique that you can say that an eventful man would probably lead to a better course of history, would lead to say independence like it happened in India, and we got an example of Mahatma Gandhi. But on the other hand, we see Hitler also. He is also an event making man. How? Because we know that in Germany we already had democracy being established, and then we got Hitler, who was basically turned into a dictator and tried, though he was basically favoring for the Germans prosperity, but then what happened, at what cost? So then we see that Hitler particularly, we do not consider him as a great man, though he had all the leadership qualities, though he was a born leader it is said, but still what happened was persecution of lot of Jews, and that is why we see that Hitler particularly, even though he had the qualities of an event making man, but it did not lead to what we expected it to. Okay, so that is why this concept of leadership can be claimed as morally flawed. Why? Because at what cost are we basically producing a leader, or at what cost are we listening to such leaders? Okay, leadership theory then progressed from the dogma that leaders are born or destined by nature to be in their role at a particular time to a reflection of certain traits that envisage a potential for a leadership. Okay, now here this particular dogma that the leaders are born, okay, or they inherently have it in their genes, this dogma was basically destroyed. Why? Because there were particularly leaders like Hitler and Napoleon who led this morally flawed leadership, and that is why we saw that it's not just that the leader is born, but also that there are certain kind of traits which he or she acquire over the period of time, and that is why we lead to the second theory of leadership, which is your trait theory. Okay, now what is a trait theory? As the name suggests, it is basically acquiring certain kind of traits. When you are say in power for 10 years, you tend to acquire certain kind of traits in leadership. Why? Because there will be certain kind of circumstances where your capacities and intelligence would be required in particularly situations where something new or uniqueness need to be applied in order to get to a solution. So then at that time there are certain traits which you acquire at that particular moment in time in order to change the outcome. Okay, so trait theories ignores the assumption about whether the leadership traits were genetic or acquired. So here, even if you are getting it from your genes, for example, a lot of people said that Indira Gandhi had it in her genes, she got it from her father Jawaharlal Nehru, and that is why she became a very popular leader. Okay, so trait theory particularly ignores this assumption that it is not that the traits are genetic or acquired. A leader is a leader whether the traits have been acquired through experience or it is in their genes. Okay, so Jenkins identified two traits like this. Okay, one is the emergent trait, which is basically those which are heavily dependent upon hereditary, as height, intelligence, attractiveness and self-confidence. Okay, second is effectiveness trait, based on the experience or learning, including charisma as fundamental component of leadership. Okay, now these are the two traits. One is emergent traits, which basically means that it was in your genes, you had that kind of aura you had. Okay, For example, if we take Barack Obama, we see that, he has that kind of aura, he has that kind of height, he has that kind of intelligence. So probably it was in his genes to become a leader, or these qualities were there. When we talk about the effectiveness trait, okay, now effectiveness trait is basically based on learning or experience, okay, that you learn from your particularly forefathers, or you are born in such a family where your forefathers have already been leaders. We have generally seen that, in bureaucratic families, well, their fathers or mothers or grandparents are also into bureaucracy. There are high chances that these particular their children would also go into bureaucracy. Why? Because there are certain kind of traits which they might have acquired through them, okay. So then this emergent traits and effectiveness traits are not just basically different in terms of their genes or acquiredness, but also what we talk about a charismatic feature. Now this charismatic theory of leadership is basically given by Max Weber. Now Max Weber is a sociologist who basically believed that the greatest revolutionary force capable of producing a completely new orientation through followers and complete personal devotion to leaders they perceived as endowed with almost magical, supernatural, superhuman qualities and power. Now this is basically associated with the kind of charismatic quality which is there in particularly people, but Max Weber talks about three kinds of authority. Now for Weber, this leadership comes with a certain kind of authority, the certain kind of power with it, and he basically defines this leadership on the basis not of the qualities but as well as the authority from which they are particularly getting this leadership, or the authority they are able to exercise in the society. So Max Weber particularly talks about three kinds of leadership, or three kinds of authority. One is your traditional and particularly traditional authority, okay. So this traditional authority is based on custom, traditions and established practices. It relies on legitimacy of age-old practices and believes that things should be done as they always have been. Now this traditional authority, you can see that when you see panchayats, okay, it is generally that the eldest member of the village is generally made a leader, okay, or he is given an authority. Why? Because it is believed that with age or seniority, you have certain kind of experience and people would probably succumb to your authority. So Max Weber talks about that there are certain situations, or for example during the kingdoms, okay, during the Ottoman Empire, why people used to listen to their kings, because one, they had some kind of authority, and also there was a certain kind of custom that kings were sent by the god themselves to rule. So that is why it's coming from a certain kind of customs and traditions, and this authority or leadership is only accepted because it is maintained through customs or tradition. The second kind is a charismatic theory, okay, which basically, or the leadership quality, which is, it is the form of authority is based on the personal appeal, charm and extraordinary qualities of the leader. It is not tied to rules, officers or traditions, but stems from the leader's ability to inspire and motivate followers. Again, Mahatma Gandhi is a very good example of how he could motivate, okay. And similarly in contemporary times, you also see Narendra Modi, he has a certain kind of appeal with the population, where when he came in 2014, people used to actually listen to him, okay, or look up to him. Last is your legal and rational theory. Now this kind of theory, trait of leadership is basically based on the system of rules, regulation and laws. The leaders who hold this kind of authority gain their legitimacy from the position they hold, okay. Now this is basically the bureaucrats, okay, the legal and the rational. We all know that bureaucracy follows certain kind of rules and regulations. Though they are the leaders, they are basically the people who implement these policies and carry out day-to-day regulation in the country. But again, how are they able to do that? Because of their certain kind of legality behind it, not because they have certain kind of charisma. That is an extraordinary feature which they might have, but that's not a necessary feature, okay. It basically depends on the legality. You are getting authority from the rules, from the legal, okay. Then we move forward to the contingency theory. What is contingency theory? It is basically also called situational theory, and as the name suggests, situational. It is based on how the leadership behaves during a particular circumstance. Okay, so this theory says that no leadership style is precise as a stand-alone as leadership style used in reliant upon the factors such as the quality, situation of followers, or the number of other variables. Now, this particular theory believes that there is not one quality of leadership that could be suffice for saying that this he or she is a great leader. Okay, it could be in your genes, it could be in your charisma, it could be the traits which you have acquired over the period of time, or you could be a born leader. But then also it depends on the certain kind of situation, how you turn a situation into for your own benefit, or expose yourself, your capabilities to the world during a situation, is basically what this contingency theory talks about. Okay, so hence there is no single right way to lead, because the internal and external dimensions of the environment require the leader to adapt to a particular situation and transform their leadership style between task oriented and relationship oriented. Okay, now basically contingency theory talks about two things. One is, yes, there is an environment which is constantly changing, but in this changing environment, one is a task oriented leadership. Task oriented would basically mean getting the job done. Okay, for example, if there is an issue in the tech, or there's a technical issue in the system of an organization, okay, that all the laptops have been hacked, there's a technical issue there and you need a technician. Now, in this circumstances, it would be good that the task should be done. It is important that immediately this should be resolved. So, in this situation, you need certain kind of authority, you need certain kind of autocracy here in order to tell people what to do and how to do it. Okay, the second is a relationship orientation, which basically means supporting the people and building a good team. For example, you have to carry out a kind of an event where the leader has been told that this is a team which you have, and you have to go in a village and educate the people about, say, the COVID-19 which has just come up and what are the repercussions of it. Okay, now there's an outbreak of virus here and your team has to basically inform or educate people here. Okay, so in this particular situation, a kind of a good teamwork is required, a kind of a responsibility is required among the members, and that is why a certain kind of rapport should be maintained between the leader and his team members in order to establish, or in order for the work to be done. Here, the line of chain should not be from top down, but it should be basically a kind of an horizontal communication happening, where we see that this relationship, it's supporting people. You basically tell your teammates what to do, but you basically give them the authority of how they are going to do it. You do not actually micromanage it, but you delegate the work. Okay, so that is a relationship oriented. The theories of contingency are subcategory of behavioral theory that contend that there is no one finest way of leading or organizing, and the style of leadership that is operative in some circumstances may not be effective in others. Okay, for example, the principal has asked the teachers that there's a new management and they need to adopt to it. Okay, so this circumstance is basically when the principal has basically given or delegated the authority, created a certain kind of relationship with the teachers in order for the management to work better. Okay, whereas on the other hand, if there is an outbreak in the school, there's a fire. Now, in this situation, there the work needs to be done. What is the work? That everybody needs to be evacuated. In this, there has to be a chain of command, a line of command, that from the top, whatever the leader is saying, the others definitely follow without questioning. So, in this situation, we require something called task oriented. Okay, so contingency theories assume that the leader was the focus of the leader-subordinate relationship. Situational theories opine that the subordinates play a pivotal role in defining the relationship, as it is that the style of leadership should be according with the maturity of the subordinates. Okay, now here is basically contingency theory and situational theories are differentiating on a very small point of view, is basically that where you see that there is a certain kind of division of authority between the leader and the subordinates in contingency theory, where it is said the leader has much more authority than its subordinates. In the situation theory, it is said that there is no leader-subordinate relationship here. Everybody is equal, but it should be done only on the situation basis, what the situation would demand, okay? As I gave you the example of the school. Though the situation leadership stays to emphasize mostly upon the leader, it creates the significance of the focus into the group dynamics or creating group dynamics in order for the work to be done. It's not just about the leader who has the capabilities, but a leader should also ensure that the group members should have equal capabilities for any particular task to be done, okay? The next kind of theories is the style or the behavioral theories. Now, behavioral theories have come into, in contemporary times. Why? Because, we see that, people's behavior, it has become a lot of importance. The psychological factors have become a lot of importance. So, why that is? Because over the period of time, we have analyzed that not legality can never get the work done. Even though you have placed somebody with the authority, utmost authority, but still when it comes to, getting the work done, sometimes legality doesn't work. What works is informal communication. What works is sometimes, behavioral style of leadership, where you basically build your trust with the other group members, okay? So, style and behavioral theory acknowledges the significance of certain necessary leadership skills that serve as an enabler for a leader who performs an act while drawing its parallel with the previous capacity of the leader, okay? Now, a kind of theorists called Fedler and House have identified two methods of demarcating leadership styles, focusing on the effectiveness of the leadership, okay? What is effective, okay? How can we basically say that, this style of leadership will be more effective? So, on what grounds do we see that, a leader can actually improve his skills, okay? One is consideration, okay? Now, this consideration is basically saying that concern for people and relationship behaviors, okay? It's that you are concerned with your team. If somebody in your team is fallen sick, it's not that just you go and use your authority over that person. But of course, you will have an empathetic attitude towards that person and realize that when a person has fallen sick, he or she should not be burdened with work, okay? So, this is basically a relationship development. Refer to the amount of confidence and rapport a leader engenders in his subordinates, okay? So, the consideration is that you basically feel, it's a behavioral style, you feel for the other person, you feel the empathy for the other person, okay? The second is commencing. Now, this is basically concern for production and task behaviors, okay? The extent to which the leader structures, directs and defines his or her own and the subordinate roles as they have the participatory role towards organizational performance, profit and accomplishment of the mission, okay? So, commencing is basically you're trying to tell somebody what to do, okay? You're trying to commence it, you're going to say it, okay? So, again, this is basically a kind of an extension version of, delegation, okay? But when you're delegating also, you need to be assured that, the concern for the production, what solution do you need at that particular time, what kind of task you need at that particular time. If you need, say advice from lot of people, you cannot behave in an autocratic manner. But if you basically want an immediate action or an immediate solution, then particularly you have that kind of tonality with it. So, that is what, style and behavioral theories say, that one, you should keep in consideration about the relationship you have with people, and secondly, even while you are delegating certain kind of task behavior, it should basically be a very clear one, that it directs and defines the roles, particularly of the subordinate, as well as ensure their participation equally as that of a leader, okay? The next what we are going to be studying is about the styles of leadership, okay? Now, what is the styles of leadership particularly? We just did with the theories, okay? Great men theory, contingency theory, trait theory. These are the basically theories which have been evolved over the period of time. Now, what we are going to do is basically the styles. What kind of styles people have acquired to, show their leadership skills at any given point of time. Now, in this particularly, we divide into three. One is democratic style of leadership, second is your laissez-faire style of leadership, and third particularly, is an autocratic style of leadership. Okay. Now, when I say talk about a democratic style of leadership, as the word suggests, democracy, what do we mean by democracy? We basically say that, democracy is something where it is participation of everybody in the process of running a government. Okay, so democracy is by the people, of the people. Okay, so this is what democracy talks about. But when we talk about democratic style of leadership, we also mean, the same thing, that there is no a leader or a subordinate relation, but there is a certain kind of equality which has been established. There is no that one is a coordinator, other are the coordinatees. There is no hierarchy here. There is basically a kind of an equality which is being established here, which basically means that everybody has an equal share, or everybody is participating equally in a democratic setup. Okay, now this could be particularly see that people when are fighting for the democratic rights. Okay, during farmers movement which happened in India, we saw a lot of farmers were revolting against the new farm laws which came, and they were concerned about the MSP, okay, minimum support price, and that is why they were fighting for it. Okay, so that is basically, even a common man has been participating in it. Okay, so that is a kind of say democracy being established here. There's a participation. So how do we see that in a style of leadership? We'll see now. Okay, you introduced three different styles of leadership. One is democratic, second is authoritarian, and third is laissez-faire. Okay, the employees serving with democratic leaders display high degree of satisfaction, creativity and motivation, working with great enthusiasm and energy, irrespective of the presence or the absence of the leader, maintaining better connections with the leader in terms of productivity. Now, a very good example could be the PM and his cabinet members. Okay, now particularly when PM selects his cabinet members, now these cabinet members have equal say in the policy making, and there's a certain kind of creativity which is required in a democratic style of leadership. Why? Because here the leader is not somebody who basically directs the other people what to do, but ask the other people to come up with new solutions, come up with creative solutions to deal with a certain kind of problem, say the problem of development, the problem of water sanitation, and so on. Okay, so the employees here are basically, there is a high degree of satisfaction. Why? Because you are basically being heard, you are basically being given a certain kind of position, a certain kind of authority to act. There's a creativity here, there's this motivation which is given by the leader, and also there's always a certain kind of enthusiasm among the group members. Okay, this style implies maximum freedom for the group members, but as Argus stretches, it does not mean that there is no leadership. Okay, just because everybody is participating and everybody has a certain kind of authority and duty assigned to it, that does not mean that the leader will not be a part of it. A leader has to ensure that there is no conflict among the members. A leader has to ensure that there's a constant motivation from him coming, that we can do it, or we can basically excel at this. So the group reserves for itself a final authority to make the decisions. These decisions arise from the needs of the group and are freely discussed by the members. The group has two rights, self-directional and self-accusational. Okay, now what are these two? These are basically, with the help of the leader, the group sets policies, which is self-direction. Self-direction basically means that I am a leader, I know what the work has to be done, so I will set a certain kind of agenda of today, I will set the certain kind of course of action we have to employ, and then there is a feedback of that course of action. So that is self-direction. I am going to tell you what to do, I am going to tell you how to do it, and then there is certain kind of feedback of it. The second particularly is a self-actualization. Now, what are these? Group members are free to initiate tasks and interactions independently of the leader. The group, not the leader, decides when the goals have to be achieved. Now, in this particular task, you have particularly the group members who are deciding the course of action, who are deciding particularly how the task needs to be done and how the goal needs to be achieved. Okay, so this kind of leadership particularly requires certain kind of creativity. Okay, so democratic leader is often appointed by the group. theoretically every member can be a leader. Leadership is seen as a set of functions which are property of the group and not the leader. Leadership grows from the needs of the group rather than the needs of the leader. The democratic leader draws ideas and suggestions from the group by consultation. He suggests but does not order. Now here there is a difference in democratic style of leadership, and we'll also see how it differs from the laissez-faire and the authoritarian. Okay, democratic leadership is generally empowering your group members, or the group members choose a leader rather than the other way around. And also here there is no hierarchical chain of authority or line of control. Okay, so it is an equilateral, permissive, group oriented and considerate style of leadership. When he praises a member, it is for the work performed rather than the personal traits. Okay, now this is very much work oriented, which would basically mean that when a particular person has done a good work, he or she should be praised for the work he or she has done, rather than commenting about that personality traits of that person. Okay, so when he criticizes a member, it is done on the matter of the faculty in that it attempt to aid, not destroy the person. Okay, so here he is also saying that particularly in a democratic style of leadership, even when you're criticizing somebody, you should not criticize in order to demean that person, but it should be done in a form of an effective criticism. Even when you basically in future, if you're a part of an organization and if you're chosen a leader, even if something goes wrong, you need not pinpoint it to a particular person, and even if you're pinpointing it, it should come in a tonality that you're trying to improve the person's qualities or the capabilities rather than to demean that person. Okay, now the second or moving forward with this democratic style of leadership is that in this kind of leadership, he creates increased feeling of cohesiveness among the group members, and particularly this group productivity, whether or not the leader is present, would basically lead to certain kind of outcome, and it would ensure certain kind of job satisfaction. The morale is raised of the group members. There's a broader time perspective. It is more flexible behavior of the members. There are fewer feelings of hostility. Why? Because people have been giving certain kind of authority in which they basically function, and also that each member is given an equal treatment. There is no high and low, and that is why nobody would be jealous of each other. Why? Because there is an equilibrium rather which has been achieved here. There is no frustration and submission, a decrease in the number of complaints and less need for scapegoats. Okay, now scapegoats is somebody that because if, for example, a leader has told you what to do, and if that the kind of message which he or she has given is particularly does not require for that problem, and a solution is not reached, so what basically most of the leaders do is they tend to say that it was basically because of this other person. Okay, now those are scapegoats, like you have basically tried to pinpoint somebody else for your own mistake. Okay, in this circumstances particularly, then there is a certain kind of anger which has been aroused, or there is a certain kind of humiliation which has been aroused. But when you have a democratic style of leadership and everybody has a different kind of authority, everybody has an equal status, then it is very difficult to pinpoint your problems or your mistakes on anybody else. Okay, so the work is done may well be more original, since the product of several minds rather than just one. Here we have different groups, different people performing the functions. Okay, but the main problem of this democratic leadership occurs when the group members are not educated and cannot function in a manner described. Now whenever we are trying to establish democratic style of leadership, we should basically ensure that the people in your group are equally capable, equally have that capabilities, and if that is not the case, then there would be the solution would not be reached, because either they are not well equipped or they do not have that intelligence in order to come up with solutions. So it is very important that whenever a group is maintained, all the members of the group should have almost not just equal, but a kind of an equilibrium in terms of their intelligence or their capacities. Okay, participative leadership is very similar to democratic leadership, except that the leader ultimately makes a decision for the group. Here the members are allowed and encouraged to make decisions and discussions and participate in problem solving. Now, it's just the way in contemporary democratic India, where we have participation, which is basically people talk about their demands, they revolt for their demands, or they put up their demands. But at the end, you have the PM or the ministers particularly taking decisions for them. So it's a participatory, you have participation, but ultimately there's a leader who is deciding for you. Whereas in democratic, it's a group, it's based on consensus, okay? The next very important style is your autocratic or authoritarian style of leadership. Now, in this particular style is very different from your democratic style, okay? It cannot say that because, as a name suggests, it's autocratic or authoritarian, it is based on, negative style of leadership. We would not say that. Why? Because when we talk about authoritarian, it basically depends on the situation. As I told you, that if there's a fire outbreak, there you need a certain line of command, a chain of command, okay? Now, this generally happens in armed forces, your leader, your senior, whenever he or she, commands you something, the job needs to be done without questioning. But that doesn't mean that it's a wrong style of leadership. It is definitely right, because at that particular time, at that particular situation, you require certain kind of leadership. So, authoritarian leaders are basically focused on great quantity of output. You need to reach the output, and that is more important rather than the participation of the members. This style of particularly consideration does not work here, okay? So it is basically, it's effective in crisis situation, as I told you. It's task oriented, okay, and seek obedience, especially happens in armed forces. It decides on goals, methods and process of achieving it. The autocratic style of leadership, in that he, in terms of his own wishes and desires, without consulting the group. So the leader here is basically is the initiator, and he or she decides what has to be done, how it has to be done, rather than consulting the group members, okay? Now, this is basically, he tends to use non-constructive criticism, because at that particular time when there's a crisis situation, criticism is not basically welcomed. Why? Because the work needs to be done, the output has to be achieved. Now, the autocratic creates increased hostility. This is one of the basically criticism of authoritarian style, and rivalry among the group. Identification with the leader role rather than with the group, and there is an anxiety. Now, this is just basically the opposite of what was happening in democratic style of leadership. But yes, we cannot say that authoritarian style is good or bad. It is basically depends upon the circumstances, okay? So in certain circumstances, democracy is style of leadership is required, while in other you have authoritarian, okay? In this, it's a paternalistic leadership, which is closely related with autocratic. Paternalistic basically means that, you can associate it with the father side, okay? When your father is telling you something to do, the children have to do it. Sometimes there's no mode of questioning here. So it's paternalistic in nature. So similarly, this style is also paternalistic in nature. Communication patterns in this group are generally member to the leader rather than member to the member, okay? So there's a chain of hierarchy here, okay? So this consideration is the main distinction between autocratic and paternalistic style, that particularly in paternalistic style, we know that the group is dependent upon the leader, okay? He does this as he is responsible for the group action and wants to prevent mistakes, thus protecting himself and the group. The paternal leader considers the welfare of the group more than the autocrat does, okay? Now, here is the difference particularly. In paternalistic, you find that your father is concerned about your well-being, whereas in autocratic, it's not mostly about the well-being, but it is particularly, say, well-being of a third entity, okay? Say in armed forces, there's a war going on. Now, the main aim or the goal is the safety of the country rather than the safety of the leaders, the autocratic leaders, group members, okay? So then, it is not very paternalistic in nature, whereas when we talk about, family members, or we talk about people who are concerned with you, then it basically talks about the paternalism coming out. So that's a very important distinction which is there between paternalistic and autocratic, leadership qualities. The third is your laissez-faire leadership. It is basically, now what does laissez-faire mean? That it's a free market. Now laissez-faire comes with a term called free market society. Okay, we also know that in democracy we have free market. It goes in hand. But what is the main difference here is, in laissez-faire you require the leadership should only considered relevant while leading a team of highly skilled and motivated people who had an excellent track record in the past. Now, because this particular style of leadership requires you to be a leader, there is no high and low in this. Anybody could be a leader, but in this particularly laissez-faire, you require a very skillful sources. Okay, everybody should be, have certain kind of skills. The motivation should be already there. You should not need a leader to motivate you, and it should be self-instructive. Okay, that you have been motivated by yourself. You know what to do. There is no particularly an entity or a leader telling you. So here, in a group, everybody is leader rather than a leader and a subordinate situation. Okay, between autocratic and democratic in the terms of control by the leader, in both you have a leader here, but in laissez-faire everybody is a leader. Okay, laissez-faire style is individual centered. As I told you, you have to be your own motivator, you have to be your own highly skilled person, while in autocratic style leadership it is basically leader centered. Okay, the laissez-faire leader provides material and information to the group while exercising minimum control. Okay, it's basically that you have been given a task by your teacher that this is particularly equipment you have, and now you have to build a model of a volcano. Okay, now this is particularly you've been given, but there is no technical support, no supervision of the teacher here. Okay, so then it's a laissez-faire. Why? Because all the students have to build with the same equipment. It depends on their own skill how they do it. Okay, this serves basically as an information booth, answering questions only when asked. He makes no attempt to evaluate the work performed either by praise or criticism. So there is no praise, there is no criticism. A laissez-faire style creates tension and anxiety because the subordinates are frustrated with the lack of leadership. Now here is also, even though you are your leader yourself, but what if sometimes that creates a problem, that creates a situation where you require certain kind of expertise of a leader. So then there is no expertise. So here you find that there is a tension, there is an anxiety, there is chaos and confusion, and especially uncertainty of whether the output would be good or not. Okay, so this group is disorganized and its members feel dissatisfied. In terms of work, there is less work is done, and the work is usually of poor quality because it's basically does not have an expertise of a leader which is should be there. It depends on your own skills. Even though you have this particular style of leadership tells you that it should be highly skilled people, but at any given point of time you cannot be the person of know it all. Okay, there has been situations where you might not know things, and in order to get the output done you require certain kind of expertise, but that's not present in this style of leadership. Okay, now these style of leaderships are not mutually exclusive, which basically means that there's no one style of leadership which any particular leader can perform. It basically depends on the situation and the circumstances, and there could be a mixture of say autocratic and democratic, or laissez-faire and democratic, and autocratic and laissez-faire. Okay, so that is why Uris writes that the skillful leader is one who knows which style to use at which time. So it's basically circumstantial. Okay, now this is basically a certain kind of you can say a comparison between autocratic leadership, democratic leadership, and laissez-faire. In terms of decision making, in autocratic it is centralized, in democratic it has been shared among the groups, and in laissez-faire it is decentralized because everybody is independent of the other member. Leader's role, we know autocratic, it is very commanding, it is very authoritarian. In democracy, you have the leader is like a facilitator or a guide, whereas in laissez-faire, you find that there's minimum involvement of the leader. Group involvement is minimum in terms of autocratic. Why? Because we require a line of command. In democratic, it is high. Why? Because members give inputs. And laissez-faire, it is high because they're left to themselves and they can use their freedom as they want. Okay, the communication style is in autocratic is top down. In democratic leadership, it is two-way. There's dialogue from both ends. There's positive criticism. In laissez-faire, it is minimum from the leader. In terms of creativity and initiative, autocratic is leader decides everything. In democratic, it is the group suggestions, whereas in the lazy sphere, it is the members who act on their own ideas. Okay. Next is motivation. You have in the first is obedience or discipline and fear. In the second, you have belongingness and shared goals. In the third, you have your self-motivation. As I told you, you have to be self-motivated to do things. There is no motivation given by the leader. Efficiency, of course, is high because it is in crisis in autocratic. Efficiency is also high because there is a group expertise in democratic. But, efficiency in lazy sphere can be low if the group lacks a certain kind of direction or motivation or expertise. Strengths, particularly in the three, is that in the first autocratic, decisions are fast and quick. In second, it's teamwork, it's better management is done. In the third, it's high innovation, because you're left to yourselves, the innovation and the growth of individuals are high. The weakness is that in autocratic people, there is a lot of lack of creativity. It is always the team is dependent upon the leader. In democratic, you see the decisions slow and time consuming. Why? Because, the group has to take decisions and it takes time. In the last, it is chaos, and of course, the rules are unclear. Last is best when used, okay, when you should use these. Now, in autocratic, as I told you, it is generally used in crisis situation, in military situations. Democratic requires when there is a complex task, you require innovation, okay, especially to design policies, for example. The last is highly skilled, when you have to, for example, design a certain kind of robot or design certain kind of AI tool, okay, then lazy sphere leadership would work at its best, okay. Now, this particularly leadership styles or theories here are talking about, which particular theory should fit, whether it is great man theory, whether it is situational theory or contingency theory or trait theory. We talked about these theories particularly, but what is important is that these particular theories are not exclusive from each other. They are basically, in every leader you will find some theories, dominant, whereas in others you will find, for example, great man theory. Even though Mahatma Gandhi is considered to be an eventful man, he is also considered to be, born leader, okay. Similarly, if you sometimes see Indira Gandhi as a leader, as a politician, she was considered to be, had a certain kind of autocratic leadership. But when we talk about autocratic, it was the situation required her to be autocratic. A strong leader was required. So, authoritarian style was required at that particular time. So, it depends upon the circumstances, okay. But when we talk about, say, Manmohan Singh. Now, Manmohan Singh could be referred as, a style of leadership which was democratic, where everybody was given equal amount of, say, contribution to make. And he did not, as some of us would evaluate him, that he did not have qualities of a great man leadership. But when we talk about skillful, he was very skillful in economics, okay. We were able to avoid inflation because he was our minister at that time, and that is why we say that, he was a very skillful person. So, democratic style of leadership was basically portrayed by Manmohan Singh. So, that is what happens is that when we see that, it's a, what is required at that time of that hour, okay. So, we cannot say that, whether democratic style is, good or whether lazy sphere is bad. They are all basically mutually dependent on each other. It is just the circumstantial situations which define that, what or how the leadership is leader is particularly evolved over the period of time. So, when we talk about, who is a good leader, we evaluate. So, now this is just for your, a kind of analysis which you can do at home. You can pick up any 5 leaders and you can evaluate these 5 leaders. It could be Mahatma Gandhi, it could be Nelson Mandela, it could be Martin Luther King Jr., it could be Indira Gandhi, it could be Manmohan Singh, it could be Narendra Modi, it could be S. Shankar. You can pick up any of these leaders and try to analyze, their qualities, how they basically put themselves out there on the basis of these particular theories. So, it would be helpful to you to analyze when you are reading these theories, because in such situations, you can actually say that, which particular style of leadership quality has been portrayed, or which style of leadership was basically dominant in these particular personalities, because these are all considered to be leaders. Also, whenever you are evaluating, please ensure that there could be certain traits which are not mentioned in these theories, but you feel that these traits are very outstanding. So that doesn't mean that this style of leadership is not a leadership. Okay, so when you are evaluating all this, please keep in mind that leadership could be anything, the uniqueness of it, the traits of it, the genesis of it, or it could be authoritarian, autocratic, democratic, or laissez-faire. Okay, so please evaluate. It would be helpful for you to understand this kind of leadership qualities. Okay, so I think this should be suffice for you to understand who is a leader, what qualities they entail, and as far as reference books are concerned, for this particular, since it's a skill enhancement course, I would recommend you to not read any particular books, but it would be more analytical in nature if you basically pick up leaders and try to analyze on the basis of these theories which has been given. So thank you for this.